Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into something pretty fascinating. We're talking black swan events today.
Those unpredictable, high-impact events, right? The ones that really shake things up.
Exactly. We're using Nassim Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan as our main guide.
That book really changed how people think about risk and making decisions when so much is uncertain.
It definitely did. So we're going to explore Taleb's ideas, see what we can all learn from them. You ready to have your mind blown?
Absolutely. Let's start by laying out what makes a black swan a black swan.
Sounds good to me.
First off, it's got to be unpredictable.
Okay, so not just any surprise.
Right. We're talking events that are completely outside what we think is even possible based on what we know.
Like, imagine trying to predict the internet back in the day. No one saw that coming, and it changed everything.
Exactly. The impact is the second big thing.
These aren't small events, are they?
No way. Black swans have huge ripple effects.
Across everything, really. Society, economics, politics, technology, even like how we think about the world.
Think about 9/11 or the 2008 financial crisis. Their impact is still felt today, years later.
And it's not over yet either. It's crazy how one event can have such long-lasting consequences.
Absolutely. And then the third thing, maybe the most interesting, black swans are only explainable after they happen.
It's like we suddenly become experts, right?
Yeah.
Connecting the dots, like it all makes sense now.
It's a very human thing, trying to find order in chaos, but it can make us blind to how random these events really are.
So if we can't predict them, how do we even start preparing for black swans?
Well, Taleb says the problem isn't just the events themselves, it's how we misunderstand uncertainty.
We focus on what we do know, what we can measure, but there's a whole lot we don't know out there.
Exactly. He talks about two domains, mediocristan and extremistan.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Mediocristan, that's the world of the predictable.
So like height and weight, test scores, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Things cluster around an average, and outliers are rare, not that significant.
The bell curve rules supreme there.
Right. Then you've got extremistan, where black swans hang out.
That sounds a bit more intense.
It is. We're talking wealth, book sales, war casualties, pandemics, things where one event can flip the script.
The bell curve doesn't really apply there, does it?
Nope, not reliably. And the trouble is, we often use mediocristan thinking in extremistan situations.
So we underestimate the likelihood and the impact of these huge events.
Exactly. Our models and predictions lull us into a false sense of security, but in extremistan, the unexpected is practically a given.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the difference, but can you give me a real-life example of how this plays out?
Sure, think about the music industry.
Yeah.
In the old days, record sales, they followed a pretty predictable pattern, right? Big hits, average sellers, flops.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then along comes the internet, digital downloads. Totally upended the industry.
The music industry was chilling in mediocristan.
Yeah.
Then, bam, the internet, a black swan, shifted everything to extremistan.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And that shift, it had huge consequences for how music is made, shared, consumed, everything.
So if I'm trying to, say, predict the success of my next project, I shouldn't just look at past data, because a black swan could change everything.
Exactly. And that's where our love for narratives gets us into trouble.
What do you mean?
We like nice, neat stories, finding cause and effect even where there might not be any.
We want a simple explanation, even if it's not the whole truth.
Yeah, but the world is messy. Sometimes things happen randomly. Taleb calls this our addiction to narratives, and it can lead to bad decisions.
So how do we break free from that overconfidence? How do we start seeing the world with, let's say, a little more black swan awareness?
Well, one way is to understand what Taleb calls the ludic fallacy.
Ludic fallacy.
Mm.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
It's basically the mistake of applying game-like rules to the real world, which is way more chaotic.
Like thinking you can beat the casino just because you know the odds?
Exactly. But in real life, there's always a chance of something crazy happening, something you could never predict.
A power outage, a sudden rainstorm, who knows?
Taleb tells this story, actually. A casino with all this fancy security and risk models, they lost millions because they didn't account for it.
Oh,
Wow.
don't leave me hanging.
Their star performer getting injured by a tiger during their act.
Seriously, a tiger?
Yeah, it's a perfect example of the ludic fallacy in action.
Wow. Okay, so even with all our data and algorithms, there will always be blind spots.
Exactly. Those unknown unknowns we can't control for.
So we got to be humble about predicting the future.
Absolutely. Acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and surprises are inevitable.
Okay, so if we can't rely on models and predictions, how do we even make decisions in a world that feels increasingly unpredictable? Do we just become hermits?
Not quite. Taleb isn't saying we should stop trying to understand the world or plan for the future.
So what's the alternative?
It's about shifting our mindset. Embrace a more adaptable approach to decision making.
But don't we need some level of prediction for any decision?
Sure, but we need to be realistic about the limitations of those predictions and be ready to adjust when the unexpected inevitably happens.
Makes sense. So how do we do that in a practical way?
One key is to focus on minimizing the negative impacts of black swans while maximizing the potential upside of positive ones.
That sounds good, but how do we actually do that?
Think insurance, diversification, and constantly challenging our assumptions.
Interesting.
It's about cultivating what Taleb calls antifragility.
Antifragility. Okay, I definitely need you to unpack that one.
It's the ability to not just withstand shocks and disruptions, but actually benefit from them.
So instead of breaking under pressure, you actually get stronger.
Exactly. Imagine a fragile system, like a delicate teacup.
Okay, got it.
Even a small tremor can shatter it.
Right.
Now imagine a robust system, like a sturdy wooden table.
Much tougher.
It can take a lot more abuse without breaking. But an anti-fragile system is even more remarkable.
Let me guess. It doesn't just survive, it thrives.
Yeah, it actually gets stronger when it's subjected to stress and disorder.
So instead of being that teacup that shatters, you're like a flexible bamboo stalk that bends with the wind and gets tougher because of it.
That's a perfect analogy. It's about accepting that we can't control everything, but we can control our response to the unexpected.
And sometimes those black swan events, even the bad ones, can lead to growth and innovation.
Absolutely. They force us to rethink things, get creative, find new and better ways of doing things.
So it's not about eliminating risk, because that's impossible. It's about learning to dance with it, embrace the unknown.
Precisely. And one powerful tool for this is what Taleb calls the barbell strategy.
Barbell strategy, another intriguing term. What's that all about?
It's about balancing a high-risk, high-reward bets with super safe, low-risk options.
Okay, I'm listening.
So maybe you invest 80% of your portfolio in very conservative assets like government bonds. Then the other 20%, you go for those moonshot investments.
So playing it safe with most of your resources, but still leaving room for those potentially game-changing opportunities.
Exactly. It's like having a safety net while still taking some big swings.
You might miss on some of those swings, but you're not going to completely strike out.
Exactly. The barbell strategy helps manage your downside risk while staying open to those massive upside surprises.
And this can be applied beyond investing, right?
Absolutely. Think about your career. You can dedicate most of your time to core responsibilities, but also carve out some time for experimentation.
So finding that balance between stability and exploration.
Exactly. It's about exploiting what you know and exploring the vast unknown.
This is making me rethink my approach to planning. Instead of being scared of the unknown, we can use it to our advantage.
That's the key takeaway. Black swans are a fact of life. They've always been here, they'll always be here.
Right?
But by understanding them, their power, their impact, we can navigate this uncertain world with more resilience, adaptability, maybe even more joy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talk about how to think about black swans, some strategies for dealing with them.
Right.
But what about the practical side of things? Like, how do we actually put these ideas into action in our own lives?
It really starts with a mindset shift. Taleb talks a lot about epistemic humility.
Epistemic humility. Gotta admit, not a term I use every day.
Basically, it means recognizing that we don't know everything.
Okay, so not pretending to have all the answers.
Exactly. Acknowledging the limits of our own knowledge, being open to the possibility of being wrong.
So instead of clinging to our beliefs, we should be ready to let them go if new evidence challenges them.
That's the idea. It's about staying curious, seeking out different perspective, and being willing to update our beliefs based on new information.
That's especially important in those extreme standard situations, right? Where our intuition can be way off.
Exactly. Think about the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah.
It was a perfect example of what happens when experts get overconfident in their models and don't account for those really rare but impactful events.
The ones that can really shake things up.
Right.
So it's not about dismissing expertise. It's about recognizing its limits, especially in those high-stakes, unpredictable situations.
Absolutely. And this is where Taleb's distinction between knowing and doing comes in.
Okay, tell me more about that.
He says we often overvalue theoretical knowledge, the kind you get from books and stuff, and undervalue practical, experiential knowledge.
The kind you get from actually doing things in the real world.
Exactly. He even has this analogy, Fat Tony and Dr. John.
Okay, I like a good analogy. Let's hear it.
Fat Tony's the street smart guy who's made a fortune just using his intuition and experience.
Got it.
Dr. John's a brilliant academic but doesn't do so well in the real world.
So it's not that theoretical knowledge is useless. It's just that it's not always enough, especially in those complex, unpredictable situations.
Right, experience and intuition are super valuable too.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it leads to another important point, right? Optionality.
You got it. It's about keeping your options open, not getting locked into one specific path, and being ready to adapt.
Because in a world of black swans, you need to be able to pivot, seize those unexpected opportunities.
Exactly. Instead of planning every detail of the future, be more adaptable, like a jazz musician improvising a solo.
I love that analogy. So planning isn't bad, but we need to hold those plans loosely, be ready to adjust when things change, which they inevitably will.
Absolutely. Black swans are a fact of life. They've always been here, they'll always be here. But by understanding them, we can navigate this uncertain world with more resilience, more adaptability, and even more joy. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on the world now. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And remember, in a world shaped by the unexpected, the ability to adapt, learn, and embrace uncertainty is key. Until next time.